She is silence sharpened into steel. When the voice that once called her name goes quiet, she listens, not to his absence, but to her becoming. And oh, what she becomes will shake the ground beneath your certainty. Not just any mirror, the one she has passed 1,000 times, the one that saw her rush past it to answer calls, to prepare meals, to adjust herself just so, the one that saw her at midnight with mascara smudged and hope unraveling like thread from a worn sleeve. This mirror has waited patiently, and now, in the absence of distraction and noise, she finally looks. Not a glance, not the quick surface scan that checks for flaws or readiness. She looks, long, deep, as if peering through time, as if she's searching for someone buried under years of compromise and soft forgetting. Her eyes search her own face, not for beauty, though there is plenty, nor for age, though it has arrived, but for recognition. Who is this woman staring back? Not the woman she was for him, not the woman she became to make things easier, but the one before. And slowly, the memory of herself begins to return. She sees the fire she used to hide so she wouldn't burn too brightly. She sees the wildness she used to trim, like an overgrown rose bush, so she would be pleasing. She sees the wisdom in her eyes, not born from fairy tales, but from surviving storms she never told anyone about. She sees a softness that remains, not as weakness, but as proof of her humanity, her capacity to still feel even after the breaking. She studies the curve of her lips, the shape of her shoulders, the way her breath moves with quiet dignity. She remembers that she once danced without reason, sang without apology, and walked into rooms without shrinking. In this moment of communion with herself, there is no audience, no mask to wear, no role to play. She is woman, fully. She is daughter of the dust, niece of the wind, cousin to the rivers that bend but do not break. She stands bare, not unclothed, but unveiled, and she does not flinch. There is no judgment here, only witnessing. She sees the stretch marks that mark her growth, the tiredness around her eyes that mark her giving, the lines of laughter and sorrow that have written themselves like poetry into her skin. She sees all of it and knows none of it is shameful. In fact, it is holy. She does not rush this meeting. She lingers, honoring it like a sacred rite. The mirror does not lie. It does not flatter or exaggerate. It only reflects. And for once, that is enough. There is no need to ask, what do they think, or will they return? The only question that matters now is, where have I been? And the answer begins to emerge, not in words, but in stillness, in breath, in presence. She has been everywhere but here. For too long, she has orbited around someone else's gravity. Now she stands in the center of her own. This reflection does not ask for approval. It does not need a witness to validate it. This reflection is her, raw and resplendent, untamed and unfinished. She remembers now that before she belonged to any promise, to any dream built between two people, she belonged to herself. Before she was someone's love, someone's comfort, someone's plan, she was already whole. The mirror shows no additions, no need for approval, only return, only truth, only her. There is a silence a woman learns to live inside when her words are no longer received, when every syllable she utters feels as though it falls like snow into a furnace, evaporated before it ever touches the ground. She does not stop speaking all at once. No, it is gradual. First, she bites her tongue mid-sentence, doubting if her thoughts hold weight. Then, she trims her truth down into bite-sized fragments, digestible and safe. She softens her tone, adds apology where none is due, places question marks where exclamation points once lived. Over time, her voice becomes a whisper within herself, a forgotten language she once spoke fluently but now struggles to remember. Her thoughts stack like unsent letters in the attic of her spirit, and she tucks her sharpest truths away in velvet-lined drawers, hoping the silence will buy her peace. But silence bought with self-abandonment is not peace, it is captivity. And then, one day, perhaps in the quiet that follows an unanswered message, or in the morning stillness after a long night of unshared ache, she hears something. It is faint, like the humming of a song she once knew. It does not ask for permission. It does not knock politely. It rises from her chest and echoes in her bones. It is her voice, raw and real and reaching. And though it trembles at first, it grows, it stretches, it insists on being heard, not by him, not by the world, but by her. She speaks not to persuade or to perform, but to return. Not to demand attention, but to restore her own. She begins speaking to herself aloud again, narrating her thoughts in the kitchen as she stirs her tea, reciting poems that have long lived in the corners of her memory, laughing at the sound of her own laughter without waiting for a response. She begins to write, not polished prose, but jagged, honest words that spill from her pen in rivers of rage, relief, and revelation. She writes letters she will never send, prayers that are more protest than praise, journal entries that crack open the sealed parts of her spirit. She sings in the shower, not like she's performing, but like she's remembering, the voice that had once contorted itself to fit into someone else's idea of what a woman should sound like, gentle, agreeable, undemanding, now rises unedited, unfiltered, unafraid. She reclaims the stories she once minimized, the battles she once whispered about, the pain she had previously narrated with asterisks and disclaimers. She names the harm. She tells the truth. She says what she was once too afraid to speak aloud. And she says it not for revenge, not for validation, but for freedom. Every time she speaks her truth, she lays another brick in the foundation of her becoming. She no longer asks, will they believe me? Or will they stay if I say this? Instead, she asks, what does it cost me to stay silent? The answer, she realizes, is always too much. She does not return to the voice she once had. She discovers a new one, deeper, wiser, weathered, but not worn. A voice born not of innocence, but of knowing, of surviving the echo chamber of invisibility and choosing to make noise anyway. She may still stumble over her own syllables sometimes. She may still flinch at the sound of her own defiance, but she does not swallow herself anymore. She does not coat her meaning in sugar or hide her depth in laughter. She speaks with the full weight of her history behind her, with every woman who was ever silenced walking beside her in spirit. Her voice now is not just her own, it is a chorus, a reckoning, a liberation. She reclaims it with every word she dares to speak into the world that once demanded her quiet. There is a particular kind of ache that comes from loving with your whole body, your whole being, and then having no place to put that love anymore. When the person you once poured into becomes a hollow space, a closed door, an unanswered call, a shadow of what once felt endless, that love does not vanish. It does not pack its bags and leave with him. No, it lingers, heavy and full and humming in the chest like a song that refuses to end. A woman learns this slowly and painfully, that the reservoir of affection she carried was never dependent on the one who received it, that the garden of tenderness she cultivated didn't grow only for another to harvest. It bloomed because she loved. And now, with no one standing at the edge of the well to draw from it, she must find new ground to water, new vessels to fill, new directions to send all that beauty aching for somewhere to belong. At first, she resists it. She clenches the love close to her chest like a letter never mailed, thinking if she waits long enough, someone might come asking for it. But as days pass and silence becomes routine, she begins to realize that holding on to love unexpressed is like carrying water in a broken jar. It seeps out regardless. So she chooses, maybe out of survival, maybe out of grace, to gather that love again, piece by piece, and turn it toward herself. It is not easy. To love others has always felt noble. To love herself now feels unfamiliar, selfish even, as though she's stealing time or tenderness meant for someone else. But slowly, the unfamiliar becomes sacred. She begins with small gestures, cooking a meal only for herself with the same care she once reserved for shared dinners, running a bath not as escape, but as ritual, speaking softly to her reflection in the morning, not for vanity, but for remembrance. That love, once scattered across someone else's life like petals left in the wind, begins to settle into her own bones. She spends time with her thoughts, not to overanalyze, but to listen. She caresses her own history, tending to old wounds she once ignored in favor of being present for others. She begins to offer herself the same patience she extended to another's mistakes, the same forgiveness she gave so freely to everyone but herself. The voice inside her, once so critical, softens. She begins to admire the very parts of her that were once too much or not enough. The way she gives deeply, the way she feels everything, the way she believes in people even when they give her no reason to. She no longer sees these as weaknesses, but as proof that love has never made her less. It has always made her more. With each day, she stretches that redirected love outward, not back into romance, but into purpose, into her art, her children, her friendships, her work, her faith, into her community, into causes that remind her she is not alone in her tenderness. She calls her grandmother more. She writes to the girl she used to be. She plants flowers in neglected corners. She reads books that feed her. She listens to music that reminds her of parts of herself she forgot were still alive. This love, once narrowed into one relationship, now spills generously into every crevice of her life, not to distract, but to restore, not to replace, but to reclaim. She gives without shrinking, without waiting, without needing to be seen, because the act of giving no longer empties her. It fills her every time she chooses herself, every time she creates beauty for no one's applause but her own, every time she breathes deeply and decides to keep going. She is loving again, fiercely, fully, but this time the love does not leave her depleted. It returns, it circles back, it expands. There are places inside a woman that have known collapse, quiet implosions where dreams once stood upright, dignified, with their chins raised to the sky. Places where trust was laid like a cornerstone, only to crack under the weight of broken promises. Love that was poured in like wet cement and left to dry with no shape, no intention, just heaviness and hollow mass. These places are not metaphor. They are visceral, felt in the tightness of the chest, in the stillness behind the eyes, in the long sigh that escapes her lips before dawn when the world is too quiet for pretending. And for a while, she might let those ruins sit untouched. She may walk around them like ancient monuments to the love that failed, the friendship that fractured, the version of herself that once believed. There is a kind of reverence in that avoidance, a belief that pain deserves its own quiet museum. But then something within her shifts, not a shout, not a command, just a nudge, a whisper from the deepest part of her that has not forgotten how to begin again. She looks at what remains, not with despair this time, but with a gaze that sees possibility in what others would call wreckage. And slowly she begins to build, not where the ground is new and unscarred, but right there among the bones and the ashes. She does not wait for perfect conditions. There are no clean blueprints, no cheering crowd, no soft place to land. She builds in the cold, in the quiet, with hands that tremble but do not stop. She builds after the crying, after the silence, after the long nights that held her like grief itself. She gathers materials from her memory, lessons she didn't ask to learn, strength she didn't know she had, grace that visited her when no one else did. She shapes bricks from boundaries, from self-respect, from moments when she said no and finally meant it. She lays foundation with the truth she used to water down, truth that now arrives steady and solid and whole. Her walls are lined with intentionality, not illusion. There is no room here for the pretty lies she once let hang like wallpaper around her life. She chooses what stays and what must never return. She places windows so the light can find her, even on the days she forgets to open the curtains. She builds slowly, methodically, without apology. Every step forward is a ceremony. She learns to hold a hammer in one hand and her heart in the other. There is no blueprint but instinct, no architect but her will. Some days the work is quiet, mending her confidence like broken tile, patching up joy in corners long untouched. Other days it is thunderous, reclaiming her voice with every nail, refusing to make herself small in rooms where she once disappeared. She is not building a castle for anyone else to admire. She is building a sanctuary for herself, a place where her thoughts can echo without judgment, where her laughter can spill like rain on a summer roof, where her dreams can stretch out without brushing against someone else's limits. And still, she keeps going, even when the wind threatens to undo her scaffolding, even when the weight of her own healing makes her question whether she has the right to thrive. She builds anyway, with tired muscles and hopeful hands, with sacred rage and holy peace, with memory and momentum braided like rope. She builds because something inside her understands. What was taken from her does not get to decide what comes next. What collapsed may have left her broken, but it did not leave her barren. The ground still remembers the shape of what can be. And though the ruins may speak of endings, her work tells a different story, one of return, of reinvention, of a woman who chose to raise something sacred from what was once reduced to rubble. There is a point where a woman, once wide open and easy to read, slowly begins to turn the pages of herself back inward, not out of bitterness, not because she is hiding, but because she remembers that everything holy is not meant to be seen by everyone. She recalls how she once offered her thoughts like petals, soft, accessible, scattered in every direction for others to gather, trample, or overlook entirely. She remembers how she laid bare her heart without filter, how she narrated her emotions before they had time to fully form, how she let herself become known in ways that left her hollow, dissected, too exposed. And when the silence came, when conversations dried up and explanations were no longer asked for, she realized she had been trying too long to explain herself to people who had already stopped listening. So she stopped, not out of vengeance, not as a tactic to win anything back, but as a gift to herself, the gift of enclosure, the gift of return, the gift of becoming once again a woman who does not need to be decoded, who does not spill every thought before it has matured into wisdom. She becomes mystery again, not as a performance, but as a quiet reclaiming of what she never should have had to give away so freely. She no longer posts every revelation. She no longer answers every call, replies to every message, opens every door. She no longer feels compelled to explain the shifts in her energy, the boundaries she has drawn, the pauses in her voice. She lets people wonder. She lets them feel the absence of the access they once took for granted. She is not cold, she is simply conserved. Her softness has not disappeared. It has just gone deeper, inward, folded into the folds of her being where only she can reach. There is power in her silence now, Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of someone who knows their worth no longer rests in how visible or available they are to others. She does not disappear. She becomes less predictable, less performative, less consumed by the need to be perceived a certain way. And what grows in that space is something far more sacred than attention. It is peace, it is privacy, it is power. She begins to speak less and observe more, not because she is afraid, but because she understands the value of her own attention. She listens not to respond, but to understand. She studies people's actions more than their words, and she stops over-explaining herself to those who have already made up their minds. She does not interrupt her own intuition for the sake of someone else's comfort. She does not shine a flashlight into every corner of her soul to prove that she has nothing to hide. She has learned that hiding and protecting are not the same, and now she holds her life like a secret garden, not walled off, but guarded, curated, intentional. She shares pieces of herself only with those who have earned the right to witness them, and even then, never all at once. The woman who once unpacked herself at the feet of people who could not hold her now speaks in metaphors and silences, in glances and gestures, in truths that live between the lines. She is not trying to be misunderstood. She is simply no longer trying to be easily understood. Mystery does not mean she is lost or distant. It means she is sacred again. It means that the most intimate parts of her life, the way she heals, the way she hopes, the way she dreams, are no longer open for public consumption. They belong to her. They rise and set within her like a private moon, seen only by those who know where to look. She does not explain her transformations. She lets them show. She does not trace her scars with words. She wears them with quiet pride. There is no longer an urgency to be seen. There is only the deep satisfaction of seeing herself clearly, truly, for the first time in a long time. She is the poem now, not the performance, the flame, not the spotlight, the sacred text, not the open journal. She becomes mystery again, not for them, but for herself. There comes a time in every heart when the weight of past hurts and unhealed wounds threatens to shackle one in a prison of resentment. Yet she, with a soul honed by both fire and rain, chooses a different path, a path lit by forgiveness and the quiet power of letting go. In the early hours of her awakening, when dawn spills gentle promises across the sky, she finds herself standing at a crossroad where bitterness lays its heavy claim like a shroud over her potential. Instead of clinging to the sour remnants of old loves and betrayed trust, she embraces the ineffable truth that bitterness is a chain she need not wear. With each step away from the broken and into the vast openness of her own becoming, she exhales memories steeped in sorrow and inhales the crisp possibility of a future untainted by regret. Her leaving is not a vanishing, but a slow metamorphosis into one who no longer permits the weight of old hurts to bind her. She walks in the radiant light of forgiveness, a forgiveness that does not excuse what was, but liberates what is to come, unburdening her spirit with a tender resolve to remain whole, even as she parts from that which once defined her. In the quiet solitude of reflection, she recalls how bitterness once crept into the crevices of her days like an insidious vine, slowly choking the life out of moments meant to be tender and true. Yet instead of allowing it to settle permanently, she nurtures the idea that every wound holds the promise of a new beginning. Each deep cut from heartbreak has been a lesson in the art of survival, a masterclass in understanding that to hold on to rancor is to let the past exert a cruel dominion over the present. Through nights marked by shadowed memories and days that brim with the quiet dignity of renewal, she chooses to transform that pain into power. Forgiveness, she learns, is not an act of concession, but one of fierce courage, a reclaiming of her own narrative that refuses to be dictated by the scars of yesterday. In this inner revolution, she dismantles the monuments of old betrayal, brick by painful brick, not out of a desire for revenge, but to create space for something infinitely more precious, peace, that serene companion who walks hand in hand with hope. As she gently closes the door behind her, leaving with an unspoken grace that defies the harsh clamor of a wounded past, she does so with a quiet defiance against the lure of bitterness. She understands that to harbor resentment is to keep a part of herself hostage, preventing the blossoming of a spirit that has learned the language of self-love and compassion. Each step she takes away from memories that once held her in thrall is a deliberate act of self-preservation, a renunciation of the notion that one must remain chained to old pain in order to remember its lessons. Instead, she molds her departure into a soft exodus, an act as much about reclaiming her inner sanctum as it is about moving forward into the arms of a new, unburdened existence. Her leaving becomes a silent sermon, a testament to the power of releasing what was without condemning it, a quiet defiance that emerges not as bitter reproach, but as a steadfast declaration that she is both the author and the guardian of her own joy. In the space that opens beneath the sound of her footsteps and the hush of her tender resolve, there blooms a resilient hope, an ever-unfolding possibility that speaks not in the harsh tongue of anger, but in the gentle cadence of renewal and the soft, persistent pulse of life continuing on with a lighter heart and a bolder gaze forward.